Hi! I am sorting out the sound. Right, bear with me while I get the sound sorted out on here. Edit. I tested this yesterday and I did find a way to do it. Hello, Freya. Dog's saying hello. Right, I'm trying to change the source for the sound. Freya, stop it. The source for the sound. Where do I do that? Pop out dashboard. Nope. I know I did this yesterday because I tested it. Share screen, mute, share, edit, webcam. And now, of course, I can't find where you can change the microphone. Hi, sorry, I am trying to work out where the button is to let me change the microphone. If not, we'll just stick with the one that's on the laptop. But ideally, I want to get the better microphone hooked up. And for whatever reason, I am not finding where it's going to let me do that. Found it yesterday, but I can't find it today. Hello, Freya. It says webcam. Yep, we want that. Sorry, this is the most unbelievably boring thing to watch. It's just somebody staring at a computer screen trying to work out a technical issue. Let's have a quick Google. How to select a different microphone for a YouTube live stream. I found it yesterday. Why can't I find it today? I think I might just need to press the button that has... No, I don't want to mute it. Oh, this is going to drive me nuts. There must be a button somewhere to do this. Nope. We might have to just put up with the audio from the laptop because this is just really boring to watch and I can't find it. That is so frustrating because I know I worked it out yesterday and I can't manage it today. That's on, that's connected. Customize. Da-di-da-di-da. No, I can't see it anywhere. Well, I have no idea why that's not working. I don't think there's much point pulling it over because I don't think it's working. Can everybody hear me all right anyway? Because I will just give up. If it sounds okay, I'll just give up and use the microphone on the laptop because this is just going to be way too boring for anybody to watch otherwise. Nobody wants to watch somebody faff around with their settings for ages. Okay, if it sounds fine, then we'll leave it as is and I will give up and try the fancy microphone again next time. Never mind. Oh, I thought that was going to work so well. I was so organized with it and everything, but no. Oh, well. Okay. So hopefully, can everybody see the tier ranking list and me in the corner? just check that because sometimes it goes like black screen for a bit, but as long as yes and yes. Thank you, Deeks. Awesome. Okay, we'll give Freya a treat because, as is traditional, we always have to give Freya a treat before we do anything on the computer. So there you go, Freya. You can do your tricks. High five. Good girl. High five. Yeah. Good girl. Oh, there we go. There we are. Hope everybody is doing well. I don't know how well you can see my Halloween decoration. Oh, whoops, wrong way. Watch out, Freya. Go on. You've had some. You've had some. I don't know if you can really see my Halloween decorations from this angle, but the pumpkin is back. It's still there, and the little ghost is still here. Oh, woo! And my little string of pumpkins, but they don't show up very well on the camera. And I've got my pumpkin spice mug. It doesn't have pumpkin spice in it because I couldn't find one for a Tassimo. You can get them for different brands of coffee maker, but not for the Tassimo that I've got. So it's just decaf coffee, but at least it's in the mug. Okie dokie. Right, I will keep an eye on the chat and just try and make sure that I'm responding as I go. If I start blinking randomly, it's because my lenses aren't quite right. I went to the optician today and I need a new prescription. But I will keep an eye on the chat and obviously just respond as and when. So hi, thank you for coming. We are here to tier rank some haunted house movies. I basically put a hard limit of 25 on the list because otherwise we're going to be here all night. So I went, okay, let's do 25 and then stop. And then I'll almost certainly do it again next year because why not? So we've got 25 haunted house movies. There are some not on here because I haven't seen them yet. So the Amityville Horror, I've read the book. I've read the entire book cover to cover, but I haven't actually seen the movie. I haven't seen Poltergeist. There's one version of the Haunted Mansion on here. I have not seen the Muppets one yet, which I think is, something I need to put right ASAP. But it's a selection of 25 movies, TV shows, episodes about haunted houses. And there are many that could be on this list that I will look at almost certainly next year because I like doing these things. Okay. Oh, and the categories. Can we all see the categories all right there? Oh, no. Where are we? Just need to. There we go. That might be a bit better. Oh yeah, there we go. We can see the categories a bit better now. Can you still see that? Okay. Shout if you can't see it or if it's gone to a black screen or anything. But hopefully you can still see that a bit better now. Categories. I named after characters from Ghost, which is not on here because Ghost is not a haunted house movie. Sort of a haunted apartment, but he moves around quite a lot in Ghost. So it's not one of the ones I'm tier ranking, but it is one of my favorite movies. So I named the categories after characters from Ghost. So top category, best of the best, Sam Wheat, Patrick Swayze, in his prime. That is chef's kiss. Then next level down, Possessed, Oda Mae Brown. I love Whoopi Goldberg in everything. She's awesome. I love her to bits. So Oda Mae Brown, Whoopi Goldberg from Ghost, Possessed by Sam Wheat, because they are all ghosts, is the second level down. So pretty good. Not best of the best, but pretty good. Then middle level, Subway Ghost. Pros and cons. The Subway Ghost is pretty scary and has an unnecessarily violent temper, but he's quite helpful as well. He's quite useful and great performance by the actor whose name I've temporarily forgotten. So Subway Ghost, pros and cons. There's good stuff, there's bad stuff, it's fine. Then the bad ones, Willie Lopez, who is, not a good guy. So that level is not great, not good. Maybe, I mean, Willie Lopez doesn't really have any redeeming features in the movie, but things in that category may have some redeeming features, maybe. And then Carl is just the worst. if you haven't seen the movie, I apologize for the spoilers. There will potentially be some spoilers here. I'm not going to like deliberately ruin every movie, but you can't really talk about ghost stories without talking about twists and endings. So just be aware there may be some spoilers coming up for some of these if you haven't seen them. And yeah, Carl is just the worst. Just the worst. Okay, there's 25 of these. I should get cracking on, shouldn't I? Okay, Crimson Peak I have first, which I saw at the cinema a few years ago and enjoyed it. It's got good performance from Tom Hiddleston, good performance from, oh gosh, I've forgotten her name again as well. I've forgotten everybody's name today. But anyway, good lead performances. I didn't remember it all that well. Like, I saw it in the cinema, I enjoyed it. Some nice gothic imagery. But, like, when I came home, I didn't massively remember it, and then when I was thinking of haunted house movies to add to this list, I came across it when I went online to remind myself of great haunted house movies rather than just remembering to put it on there. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna put Crimson Peak in Subway Ghost. Oh, I'm gonna have to, switch tab to do it. I think I'm gonna put that in Subway Ghost. I'm gonna have to keep flipping between the tabs here, sorry. Because I need to keep an eye on the chat. Yeah, I think it's fine. It's got the imagery is great. Really great visuals. Story, I do remember the story. I remember the kind of reveal of what was going on with Tom Hiddleston and Eva Green, I think, is the other actress. So it was good, but not amazing. Didn't stick in the mind massively. Next up is an episode of Angel the series. So, for those of you not familiar, this was the follow-up to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, I I realized because I'm a university lecturer, like I talk about Buffy, and over the years you realize fewer and fewer people have seen it, and then you reach the point where people know Joss Whedon from the Avengers, and then you reach the point where people know Joss Whedon for being of dubious character. And then you reach the point where people have barely heard of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, my students. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer, hopefully everyone's vaguely familiar with the concept. And it was a TV series in the late 90s and early noughties. And Angel was the spin-off. And it followed Buffy's ensouled vampire ex-boyfriend, Angel, who moved to Los Angeles. And I'm not going to go through the entire history of Angel, the series. It went through quite a few kind of metamorphoses over the years. But early on, when Angel was basically a vampire detective in LA, they did this episode called Room with a View. And Cordelia, whose character who had moved over from Buffy, a young woman who's not lived in LA long, she gets this apartment and it's haunted. And there are basically two ghosts in this episode. One of them, the one you can just about see on that image, is very scary and not very nice. And then the other one, who is invisible but makes himself known, is he became known as Phantom Dennis, because the show's pretty old and Phantom Menace had come out not that long before. So Phantom Dennis then actually sticks around for the rest of the series, at least as long as Cordelia does, haunting her apartment and being quite helpful, and even saves her once or twice. Phantom Dennis is a great character. I absolutely love Phantom Dennis. And this is the episode that introduced Phantom Dennis. And we find out why he is a phantom and why he haunts that apartment. Deek says in the chat, the real pain is when it comes back round as current again. Yeah, I'm waiting for that because then they'll all get my references again. I need all my stuff to come back around so everybody gets my references. Not that I don't know more recent references, but I'm fond of my old ones. Anywho. Yeah, Room with You is a great ghost story. The story itself, even if it was self-contained and never mentioned again, is a great little ghost story, 45-minute ghost story about a haunted apartment. It's creepy. The reveal is, and it gives us Phantom Dennis, who I absolutely love. So I think, it's either Sam Wheat or Possessed Oda Mae Brown, this one. I know it's a bit early, but honestly, I'm going Sam Wheat. I love it. I think it's great. It's an absolutely brilliant episode. If you fancy trying out Angel the series and you like ghost stories, this episode stands alone. It introduces Cordelia's apartment, but you could watch it by itself, no problem. The series got a lot more serialized later on. So I would recommend trying out Room with a View if you fancy trying out Angel the series. It's a good show. I liked its first version when it was Vampire Detective in LA. It changed over the years. But still, it's good. Not quite so good. The next one is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Where the Wild Things Are. And this episode is about a haunted frat house, which is haunted by a ghost who does not like the fact that people are getting up to the things they get up to in a frat house. Buffy and her boyfriend Riley spend the entire episode in bed. Yes, it's not great, to be honest. I mean, it's not. I've seen worse episodes of TV, but it's not terribly engaging. It's not a terribly interesting ghost story. Yeah, yeah, not the best. It's either Willie Lopez or Carl. I'm tempted to say this one is right down in Carl. Because I can't really think of any redeeming features for it, to be honest. I mean, yeah, it's not the worst episode of television I've ever seen, but I can't really think of. I mean, Giles plays the guitar at one point, which is quite nice, but that has nothing to do with the ghost story. So I think we're putting this down in Carl. That's not good. Caspar is next with Christina Ricci. Anything that involves ghosts and Christina Ricci, I quite enjoy. I'm going to take a sip of non-pumpkin spiced coffee. Caspar's good fun. I have this habit, or at least I did until recently, of mixing up Caspar and the Canterville Ghost. I'm convinced I've seen some TV version of the Canterville Ghost when I was little, although I can't really find it. And for years and years and years, I would mix them up. Caspar has some odd things, like the main Caspar CG ghost looks like quite a small child. And then when Christina Ricci dances with Caspar, he's a teenager, which is good in context. We would need that, but he doesn't appear to be a teenager the rest of the time. And it's quite cartoonish, which there's nothing wrong with that. I think when it comes to ghost stories, cartoonish is not necessarily my thing. Or if it's going to be cartoonish, I think I would just go for something even zanier. I mean, it's not on this list because it's not really a haunted house. I love The Muppets Christmas Carol. One of my absolute favorite movies of all time is The Muppets Christmas Carol. So I don't have anything against a certain amount of kind of cartoonishness. But I don't know. Caspar just, it's fun, but it's a bit odd to me. There's a slight oddness to it that Uncle Ghosts are a bit strange. And yeah, the whole thing with Caspar just being a completely different age just bothers me. So I think I'm going to put it, it's fun, but I'm going to put it just behind Crimson Peak, I think. For me, it just doesn't quite, the combination of zaniness and sincerity and oddness just doesn't quite work for me. Oh, Deeks points out the ghost CGI holds up pretty well. Yeah, it does, to be fair, because I watched it quite recently. I think it might have been last year when we were showing it to the toddler for Halloween. And that's true. The CGI does hold up pretty well. I think they had the advantage of the design of the ghosts worked quite well with 90s CGI. And it's Bill Pullman and Christina Ricci, so great actors. You can't go too horribly wrong. But I think there's better movies. It's good. It's fun. But yeah, it's fine. It's in the middle. Doctor Sleep. I'm gonna do these the other way around. I'm gonna do The Shining and then Doctor Sleep because that just makes more sense. So The Shining and then the sequel to The Shining, which is Doctor Sleep. Technically a haunted hotel. I did think about not including either of these because it's a haunted hotel and not a haunted house. But I thought, no, I think they are living in it. It is their residence because technically I've got two versions of ghosts on here. And those are hotels as well. So it was quite hard to work out where the line is. And I thought, okay, if somebody's using it as their residence, then it'll count as a haunted house. And they are living in the hotel. during at least The Shining, if not Doctor Sleep. Yeah, so I mean, The Shining is obviously a classic. I don't. It's not my absolute favorite, but it's obviously very good. When I read the book, I remember thinking that Wendy does not get enough credit, and I think that's true of the film as well, that Wendy goes through absolute nightmare in this story and holds it together and keeps it together and is able to get herself and her son out of there. And I think Wendy never gets enough credit for getting them out of there and holding it together in the face of absolute terror. I mean, the problem, I guess, is that Jack Nicholson's character, is he also called Jack? I know, I can't remember his character's name. He's not very sympathetic because he's not the best guy before he goes to the hotel and gets driven mad. But some of the ghosts are quite good. I quite like the bar and the ghostly ball and stuff. There's some quite fun, haunting stuff, and obviously, I know Stephen King didn't like the movie because it deviated too far from the book, but some of the stuff in the movie is iconic. The little creepy twin girls. I mean, you can't go wrong with creepy twin girls, can you? So I think I'm going to put The Shining in Possessed Oda Mae Brown, I reckon. I think it's not quite, as a ghost story, it's not my absolute favorite because it leans a bit more into kind of gory horror than my preference. It has a lead character who's, well, if we count Wendy as the lead character, she's very sympathetic. I'm not entirely kind of sympathetic to Jack Nicholson's character. So I think it's not quite top tier. As a ghost story, it's not quite top tier, but it's very good. And then I enjoyed Doctor Sleep, the sequel with Ewan McGregor. Not as good, definitely kind of went on some tangents. And I'm not sure how well Rebecca Ferguson's character really worked. Excuse me one second. It also had the challenge of wanting to be closer to Stephen King's sequel, Doctor Sleep, but the movie had a different ending to Stephen King's ending for the book, because at the end of the book, the hotel blows up. So it had to kind of walk this fine line of being a sequel to the movie while also sticking a bit more closely to Stephen King's books, which it managed quite well. And Ewan McGregor is always likable and watchable, but again, it's not all that memorable as well. So not bad. I don't know whether to put it in kind of the bottom of Subway Ghost or the top of Willy Lopez, Doctor Sleep. I seem to remember enjoying it at the cinema, so I'm going to put it at the bottom of Subway Ghost, I think. Okay, this next one, I don't know if anybody will have heard of. Really, really, really obscure 1930s movie, and I had to put it in. It's also technically a haunted castle, but it is somebody's home, and then it is transported from Scotland to America, the castle, where it becomes kind of an attraction at somebody's house. It's incorporated into an American, not into the house itself, but into an American home. It's rebuilt brick by brick. So I'm counting it. And also, I just want to make people aware of this movie because I love it. I love this movie so, 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 so much. So this is from the 1930s. It stars Robert Donat, who, if you've watched 1930s movies, you will know Robert Donat. If you've never watched 1930s movies, you won't, because I think he passed away in the 40s. I'm not sure. I think he died quite early, quite young. I mean, I love Robert Donat. I love him very much. He was in Alfred Hitchcock's 39 Steps, among other things, in the 30s. So black and white, but not silent, talky. And in this story, Robert Donat, he lives in a castle in Scotland that he inherited, but he has no money. This is a frequent problem for members of the British aristocracy, that they inherit these massive homes, but don't have enough money for the upkeep of them in the early 20th century. So he sells it to an American who transports it brick by brick to America and rebuilds it. And its ghost comes with it, who is also played by Robert Donat. He plays both the living person and his ancestor in a kilt. It's a romance, it's a romantic comedy, and it's just lovely. It's a lovely little 1930s, romantic comedy, um, and very sweet. Um, yeah, and because it's 1930s black and white, so the ghost effects, there's not massive amounts of special effects, but what there is quite well done. It works well in the black and white, and yeah. I had to include it because I just want to encourage everybody to go seek out this movie. It is absolutely Sam Wheat. I'm gonna put it even above Room with a View for now. Um, Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. So, if you would like an introduction to 1930s cinema, I recommend The Ghost Goes West. It's it's just it's like a warm comfort blanket of a movie, and it has Robert Donat in a kilt. And what can I say? I like that. All right. Oh, The Woman in Black. Two versions of The Woman in Black. Um, Love The Woman in Black. I've seen every version. I've read the book. I've seen it on stage. I've seen the film, the TV version, both of which, of course, are here. Um, Absolutely loved it. The stage version didn't scare me quite as much as I expected it to. I think just because I was so prepared for it and I'd already seen like two different versions of it already. But it was still pretty good. When she walks through the audience is still pretty cool. And the Daniel Radcliffe movie actually used to be my, my a weird comfort movie. This is quite funny. So Deeks was just saying warm comfort blanket is a weird way to describe a ghost story. Warm comfort blanket definitely applies to The Ghost Goes West. It's just sweet and lovely. Woman in Black is a very weird comfort movie. Very weird. It's not my comfort movie anymore because if you're not familiar with the story of the Woman in Black, the titular Woman in Black haunts a house which is only accessible at low tide. It's on a causeway across a marshland. You can only get there at low tide, and her particular thing is that she kills children. So she's a very scary ghost. Not all ghost stories involve a ghost actively hurting people. In fact, most don't. Most of the time, ghosts cannot physically hurt people. If the ghost is offering a threat, it will do it by driving somebody mad. So that's the case in The Shining. It's the case in The Haunting, Haunting of Hill House. We've got like three versions of. Um, it's the case in Room with a View. The threat to Cordelia is that she is being driven out of her mind by the ghost, who is trying to persuade people to kill themselves. Is often the modus operandi. The Woman in Black does still use that method. She still can't quite physically hurt somebody, but she drives children to suicide rather than adults, and she can do it when they're not even in the house. So she is unusually scary in the sense of unusually effective violence. And also, since I had a child, I have not watched it. I have absolutely horrendous anxiety. I'm sure I will watch it again at some point, but I picture the scene from the Daniel Radcliffe movie where the little girl drinks lye like every day of my life at the minute because my toddler's at the age where he's into everything and I'm just terrified that he's going to get into something. So, for the sake of my horrendous anxiety issues, I have not watched it since having a baby, but I will watch it again at some point. And there was a phase there where it was the Daniel Radcliffe one was this bizarre, weirdo comfort movie that I had. I think because I like Daniel Radcliffe a lot as an actor. He's got a very comforting presence. He chooses these like weird movies. He's got a really fantastically eclectic taste in film sometimes, but he has this very comforting presence. And I love spooky stories. I love haunted houses. The house on the other side of the causeway reminds me of Mont Saint Michel, which is one of my favorite places in the world. This is just off the coast of Normandy in France. So it was before I had a child. I just really enjoyed watching Daniel Radcliffe walk around this creepy old house across a causeway and look scared. Um, I just really, really loved it. And I'm sure I will again when my anxiety issues subside a bit. So The Woman in Black is definitely going. I know that not everybody would feel that way about that particular version, but I think that film was really well done. I thought it was great. A lot of people prefer the TV version, which is also very good. I know that, like, my mum was absolutely jumped out of her skin at one moment from the TV version. The Woman in Black herself in the TV version is played by an actress who played Poirot's housekeeper in the very long-running ITV Hercule Poirot series. And it's just so weird looking at her because her character in Poirot is so friendly and nice. In fact, I think the Woman in Black in the Daniel Radcliffe version is played by an actress who was in Life on Mars, playing an extremely nice character as well. So I like the 1989 version very much. I guess I saw the Daniel Radcliffe one first. I don't prefer it to the film. I know a lot of people do. Um, it's every version of this story has a different ending. So it might be slightly more accurate to the book. They're both fairly accurate. They both have a different ending to the book, which has a different ending to the stage show. The endings are all along the same theme, but they're all slightly different. So yeah, I like it a lot, but just it isn't quite for me. I prefer the movie. I prefer the movie's atmosphere. They both have a really good creepy atmosphere. They're both really, really good. By a weird coincidence, the character Arthur, the main character, is played by the actor who played Harry Potter's dad in the Daniel Radcliffe Harry Potter movies. Weird coincidence. Otherwise fairly meaningless. I like the scenes in the movie where, like, he's sitting and you just kind of see her approaching in the background. I like the set design of the house. I like the cinematography in the movie. So I understand why people love the TV version, and I think it's excellent, but it doesn't quite have that beautiful cinematography that I like in the movie. So for me, it's just a tiny bit lower down, but it is very, very good. I'm gonna have another sip of coffee. Okay. Ghosts. I love ghosts. I mean, obviously, I made a video about ghosts a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely love it. I mean, let me know in the chat if you watch either version of Ghosts or both. And if you have a preference, I don't think I have a preference. They're different, but I love them both. Obviously, the British one is the original. The British one has spooky moments in it, which the American one doesn't really. The American one, I can't think of anything in American Ghosts that's been, like, in any way scary or spooky. It's great. I love it. It's quite a light-hearted comedy. It has, moments of more seriousness, the American one, but overall it's fairly light. The British one, I mean, it's the difference between British and American humor, isn't it? British humor has a darkness to it, that American humor is perfectly capable of, but doesn't always embrace. It's the same with The Office, which is another sitcom that beautifully translates. Absolutely brilliant, both versions, but the British version is much colder than the American version. It's harsher, it's more cynical. Everybody's a little bit less happy and a little bit less affectionate towards each other. In the case of Ghosts, the affection is there. The love and the affection the characters feel for each other is absolutely there, except in the pilot where Julian full on tries to murder Alison, which is addressed toward the end of the show. But the love and affection is there. But there are some scary moments in the British one. There's Jemima, the little plague girl, who's quite creepy. There's the poor hitchhiker who was murdered. Some of the ghosts look a bit creepy. So there's more creepiness in the British one, but that doesn't make it better necessarily, because it's a sitcom. It doesn't necessarily have to be creepy. It just depends whether you want that slightly harder edge of creepiness or whether you're like, oh no, you know what, it's fine. Stick to the slightly lighter sitcom theme. I am now going to have to put them in order. I always say I don't have a favorite between these two. I like them both equally, and now I'm going to have to put them in order. I'm going to put them both at the top of Possessed Oda Mae Brown because I do love them both. I do think they're both great. I really love both shows. I think I'm going to put the British one first, just because it's Halloween. The British one has that slight spookiness. I like the cat. I love Isaac as a character. I wouldn't want to get rid of Isaac, but I like the kind of buttoned upness of the captain. And there isn't a character quite like that in the American one. But ask me tomorrow and I'll say the American one's my favorite because there's advantages that you get to meet way more ghosts in the American one. I love the variety of ghosts that you meet because they've got more episodes to fill. And the American one is also still going and might have the ending of the British one I wasn't overly wild about. It was fine, but it's not how I would have ended it. I didn't super like the ending, especially because it had an ending and then the Christmas special gave it a different ending and I preferred the first ending. So I may end up swapping those around in future. The American one hasn't finished yet. And I cannot wait to see the German and Australian versions and see what they do with it. Okay. Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice. So I watched Beetlejuice for the first time the other year, and then obviously Beetlejuice and just come out, just seen it. I like them. The zaniness is not quite my cup of tea. I don't hate it by any means. I love Winona Ryder. I love Jenna Ortega in the new one. I like, the concept is fun. I like the kind of the ghosts trying to get rid of the living from their house is funny. Just some of the kind of zanier, weirder aspects of it. It's not that I don't like weird, but again, it's just you can see like my preferred form of ghost story tends to be much more the spooky. I do love funny. In fact, at the moment, the top one is a comedy. Love funny stories, but it's just it's that kind of zaniness isn't quite my thing. So I think, oh, hang on, to the right page. I think Beetlejuice is going to go next to Crimson Peak, and then I think the sequel, Beetlejuice, is going to go below that again. Sequel was a bit messy. Seemed like it had several stories smushed together. One of which was nicked off American Horror Story. I mean, you don't have to be completely original with a ghost story. Most of them have been inspired by something else at some point, but still, it was a bit, I'm watching it and I went, well, I know what this is because I've seen American Horror Story, or at least season 1 of it. But I like the performances. I liked kind of where it left the characters. It dealt with needing to get rid of Lydia's father quite well. So enjoyed it. It was fun. It was a good ride. But the massive zaniness just isn't quite. I prefer Tim Burton when he's being creepy and spooky. I quite like Corpse Bride. And I mean, Tim Burton didn't direct it, but I love Nightmare Before Christmas. That one's just Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice is just a bit too zany for me. Next is an episode of Doctor Who, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. I had quite a bit of choice when it comes to haunted house episodes of Doctor Who. They've done a few. Most of them do not have real ghosts in them because Doctor Who is science fiction, or at least it was until last year when Russell T Davies decided that he fancied doing fantasy, and now it's got goblins in it and some kind of witchcraft. But anyway, usually Doctor Who is science fiction, and usually when there is a haunted house episode, of which there are a few, there's some kind of reason behind it that usually involves aliens or some other science fiction explanation. And I wanted to do things where the ghosts are real. I thought about putting in the Kenneth Branagh Poirot movie, A Haunting in Venice, but again, the ghosts aren't real. I've got some in here where some people interpret it psychologically rather than being real ghosts, but they're open to interpretation rather than they're definitely not real. I was avoiding they're definitely not real stories. And this one has some actual ghosts in it. The main story is not about actual ghosts, obviously. It's about Cyberman. But there is, I think it's a woman and 1 or 2 children who just wander the house in this episode. And they appear to be actual ghosts, or at least we have not had any other explanation for them. It's also a brilliant episode. It is from Jodie Whittaker's time as the Doctor. Many Doctor Who fans were disappointed with the writing during this phase of the show. But the historical episodes, so episodes where Doctor Who and their companions travel to the past as opposed to an alien planet or in the present, they tended to be quite good. In Jodie Whittaker's era, most of the historicals were pretty good, I think. And this one takes place on the evening where Mary Shelley starts writing Frankenstein and John Polidori starts writing The Vampire, and Byron is there. I can't remember what he wrote. But basically, they're all hanging around in this Italian villa during a thunderstorm, and they say they're all going to write a ghost story. What Mary Shelley actually writes is Frankenstein, and John Polidori writes about a vampire, but close enough. So it's a very important evening for English literature and Gothic literature in general. And it's a really great episode. It's really atmospheric, good storytelling, and bonus actual ghosts as well as the Cyberman. I really, really like this one. I think I need to put ghosts a bit higher, you know. Yeah, we're going to put ghosts up there. And we're going to put Villa Diodati there. There we go. I think I was being too harsh. I think I'm worried that it's just going to be the top 2 tiers for everything, but we'll see. We'll see how we go. Next up is another TV episode, The X-Files, How the Ghosts Stole Christmas. This has Lily Tomlin and I forget the name of the actor who plays her husband, as ghosts who trap Mulder and Scully in their weird old house, which Mulder has dragged Scully to. On, I think it's Christmas Eve. This is season 6 episode of The X-Files. It's cute. It's very funny. Mulder and Scully get lost and get irritated with each other, which is always good fun. Deke says nothing bad with liking lots of them. I do like lots of them. The trouble is as well, because there's so many. So when I was picking which 25 am I going to talk about, it was like, well, I'm going to talk about my favorites, aren't I? So if I do this again next year, there'll probably be more variety because I'll have watched things specifically for it and they won't all just be my favorites that I choose to watch over and over again. Oh dear. Anyway, so yeah, season 6 of The X-Files was a really good year for Mulder and Scully hadn't got romantically involved yet, but they were very flirtatious. And there were a lot of format bending episodes and episodes that kind of had postmodern fun and that were funny. It's a good season of The X-Files, season 6. And How the Ghost Stole Christmas is funny. It's good fun. It's a bit, they kind of get lost in the house and they kind of run around the house a bit, and it's got some kind of not gory bits, but like it's not really graphic. Visually arresting moments. It's just a good fun episode of The X-Files. I think we're going to put that one there. Really good. Probably not, like, there's nothing to make it massively stand out. I'd say it's at the kind of bottom end of Possessed Oda Mae Brown level, because it doesn't, have the filmmaking of The Shining or something. And I don't think it's quite as effective as Haunting of Villa Diodati, but it's good. Oh, American Horror Story. I have only seen seasons 1 and 2 of American Horror Story. I want to watch the rest, just time is limited. And you need to be able to set aside an hour after the child has gone to bed. And then I kind of need half an hour of something else afterwards before I go to sleep or I have nightmares. I get very affected by whatever I've been watching. The other night after watching the F1, I dreamed that I met Charles and Arthur Leclerc. And I was like, it's lucky I'm in Ferrari gear. I don't normally wear that. So if I watch horror right before bed, then I have problems. So I just haven't got around to it. But I have seen season 1 of American Horror Story, Murder House. Really enjoyed it. And that's the other reason I haven't got around to some of the others, that spooky haunted houses are like my favorite thing. And I like stories about witches and things. It's not that I don't want to watch the other seasons. Um, but it kind of did my favorite in season 1. Um, yeah, this time I some of the twists here I didn't see coming. I sort of watched it and was like, I should have seen that coming because I read and watch enough ghost stories. But I don't think I did. I like the actors. They're all very good. You know, it was creepy. Um, Almost creepy rather than spooky. There's an unpleasantness to it which is appropriate for horror. I think it puts it a bit further down the list for me because again, I like a certain level of darkness. It's a ghost story, so you want a certain level of darkness and unpleasantness. Um, but there is a level of nastiness that I enjoy because it's horror, but that stops it from being my absolute favorites, which will usually have a balance of the nastiness and the darkness with something more more involving love or affection, or it doesn't have to be romantic love, friendship, love, affection, the ties that bind, you know, something a little bit um more relating to human connection usually. So that would probably stop it from being an absolute favorite, but it's going to be either the end of Sam Wheat or the top end of Possessed Oda Mae Brown. Let's go with the top end of Possessed Oda Mae Brown, but it is really good. I mean, I do want to watch the rest of American Horror Story, but yeah, I did think that was a really good um, series. I guess I needed maybe 1 or 2 more slightly more likable characters, but some of them were likable. They were good. Oh, and next is an episode of Supernatural. So Supernatural basically did mostly ghost stories for the first 2 years, and then it continued to do ghost stories every now and again. There's out of 15 seasons, I think there's 1 that doesn't have any ghost stories in it. I did work it out once. I can't remember which season it is now that has literally no ghost stories. It's either 6 or 8, I think. But there are dozens and dozens and dozens of haunted house episodes of Supernatural that I could have picked from. And I didn't want to do more than 1 episode for each show. So I went with Playthings because it has a little creepy ghost girl. And you can't go wrong with a little creepy ghost girl. And there are many, many more episodes of Supernatural. I think what I'll have to do is at the point where I eventually run out of haunted house things to tier rank every year, I'll just do one for the just Supernatural's haunted house episodes. There's a brilliant one about the house of H.H. Holmes's murder house as well. But anyway, I picked Playthings for today. It's a classic story. It's fairly simple tale. You know, child has imaginary friend. Guess what? Imaginary friend is a ghost. So there's nothing particularly outstanding about the story itself, but the way it's done is just it's really good. It's very creepy. It's very effective. You know, the way it's told is nice and spooky, and yeah, creepy little blonde girl ghosts are just always going to be creepy, just in the nature of it. So I think I'm going to put it here because it's maybe not quite as good as The Haunting of Villa Diodati or American Horror Story, but it's very good. Okay, The Haunted Mansion. This is the most recent one. This is the only one I've seen. I watched half of it a few weeks ago, and then the toddler lost interest, and I had to finish watching it this afternoon. My opinion of it actually improved this afternoon. I did notice it has some nice nods to other movies in it. So my favorite scene in it was where randomly Winona Ryder, always nice to see her, is a tour guide around the ghost's other house. And that was really good fun. It was quite funny. There was some fun stuff in there. And it had, there's this very famous statue of it's like Greek or Roman style, but it's actually Victorian, and it's a woman's face with like a veil over it. It's in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. I think the original might actually be in Chatsworth, where they filmed the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. And it's quite a well-known image, this kind of Greco-Roman looking face with a veil over the front. And that statue type appeared in The Haunting, which I also watched the 1963 version of this morning, so I noticed it. And there's another moment in the Haunted Mansion where they come in to talk to one of the ghosts, and the ghost is watching TV, and they're in a rocking chair, and the ghost is invisible at this point, and the chair is just rocking. And that is a very famous image from The Woman in Black. So I liked the nods. Of course, Owen Wilson is dressed like the priest from The Exorcist. So it has some nice nods to other horror movies and other ghost stories. And I liked the tour guide scene, and it's quite funny. But, it didn't, I mean, I'm not expecting it to be like scary and terrifying, because this is a Disney children's movie based on a theme park ride. So this is meant to be a fun family adventure, not a scary, spooky story. But it just, I mean, they're in Louisiana, but the ghosts are from everywhere. Like, there's a mummy and a knight, and just, there's no sense that the ghosts belong to that place. One of the key things about a haunted house story is that there's a reason that whatever's haunting it is in the house. So, in the case of Haunting of Hill House, the house itself is evil, but all of the people get drawn to the house. In Murder House, people get, in American Horror Story, people get trapped there. They get killed and they're trapped there. And that's why. And you get more and more ghosts if the house is encouraging people to kill themselves or whatever. Same with The Shining. Like, usually people are being driven mad. They are killing themselves or each other. And then they're trapped in that place, and that's why they haunt the place, and that's why there's more and more and more ghosts. Or in some cases, it's just a specific incident that happened. So in Angel Room with a View, it's that specific thing happened to those specific people, and as a result, they haunt that apartment, and that's it. There aren't any other ghosts in there. It's just Phantom Dennis and his mum, and then they get rid of the mum, and it's just Phantom Dennis. Haunted Mansion just has random ghosts from everywhere there. I think they've been pulled there by plot mechanisms, but it doesn't have that sense of place and history that I look for in a ghost story. And maybe I'm judging it too harshly, but the versions of ghosts are sitcoms, but they're still rooted in the history of the place where they're set. And I'm aware that the Haunted Mansion in question is blatantly a plantation house in Louisiana. So I'm aware that they might not want to delve into its history too much, but they could give it some kind of 20th century history and focus on that or something. Or, don't set it there. But if it's a theme park ride, presumably they have to. But anyway, for me, it's a problem. It also just wasn't funny enough. I love funny ghost stories. My collection of ghost stories. There's funny ones in there. I love funny ghost stories. Like I said, Muppet Christmas Carol, one of my favorite movies of all time. But you got to then be funny enough. And it just isn't. And the first time I tried to watch it, it really didn't hold my attention. So I'm going to put it in Willy Lopez. I don't think it's as bad as Buffy's Where the Wild Things Are. I think it has things to recommend it, but it is mostly a kind of CG fest that just isn't quite funny enough to work. There are some nice moments. Poor old Ben has a very real feeling scene where he talks about grief, which is very kind of quite emotional and very sympathetic. So it's not awful. It's not the worst of the worst, but it's not going to go any higher than that. Okay, what am I up to? Oh, The Others. Yes. I couldn't quite see what the picture was there. Yes, The Others. Another one I saw in the cinema years and years and years ago, but in this case, I have never forgotten it. I have seen it since then. I've watched it once or twice since I saw it in the cinema in 2001. But I haven't watched it all that many times, but it sticks in the mind. It also told me about the existence of Victorian corpse photography, and that was a fun hour on Google image search. This was a Google image search I did before generative AI, so it was more reliable that most of the things you were going to find were actually going to be what you were looking for. And a Google image search for Victorian corpse photography is quite something to see. Yeah, the reveal is, it's a little bit of Beetlejuice, and a little bit of turn of the screw, but it's well done. Also, whenever my son decides to put a blanket over his head, it's like, oh my god, it's that scene from The Others, and kids do these things, or mine does anyway. It really plays up the ability of small children to be really spooky and creepy when they want to be. And Nicole Kidman's great, and I rather like the bit with Jude Law as her husband, in the fog in the grounds. It's yeah, and then when you know what's going on and you watch the movie again, it's a nice scene there. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think The Others is great. The Others is gonna have to be top tier as well. I'm gonna put it, I think it's probably the best so far. I don't know if it's gonna stay there, but The Others is a great haunted house movie. It really is. I feel bad. I don't wanna spoil it if anybody hasn't seen it because it's so good. And obviously a lot of what makes it so good is the reveals, which I've sort of hinted at, without completely describing them. But it's so spooky and creepy. And even if the reveals aren't the most original thing in the world, which they're not, it's so well done. And at the time, I didn't see it coming. But at the time, I didn't see The Sixth Sense coming either. I was young when I went to see it. But it's just really well done. The next one's a bit obscure. Most people shout in the comments if you've seen it. I don't know if anyone else has seen it. It's I think it was the BBC, a British miniseries from a few years ago. It was 2012, I think. Great cast. Saran Jones in the lead role with Tom Ellis, aka Lucifer, as her husband, and Maisie Williams at the height of early Game of Thrones fame when she was still a child as their teenage daughter. And it's about a family who have experienced tragedy and move into a haunted house. And then there's all sorts of revelations about the haunted house. It's another one it's good. You know, you watch it and it's a good atmospheric, spooky haunted house story. Obviously, great actors. Not so memorable though. Like, I remembered it well enough to remember it and be like, oh yeah, that one with Maisie Williams. But I thought of it as that one with Maisie Williams. The conclusion is, I mean, I think they call it bittersweet. It's a bit of a downer. I wasn't expecting it to be any different than it is, but it's just a bit of a downer, and it's another one that now that I have a child, I don't think I'm going to watch for a little while because it just feeds into my anxiety. So I'd recommend it if you haven't seen it and you like haunted house stories. I definitely recommend it, but I'm going to put it, I think, in between Crimson Peak and Beetlejuice. It's quite a down the line, by the numbers haunted house story. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing to really make it stand out that much either. Deke says, I have some homework to do. Yeah, I don't like the main one that, so Deeks is saying there's so many I either can't remember seeing or haven't watched. I know that the main one that I literally hadn't remembered, oddly enough, was Crimson Peak, which is weird because I did like it, but it just really hadn't stuck in the memory. Crickley Hall had stuck in my memory, I think, because of Maisie Williams, because you know she's so good and she was young at the time. She was a young teenager, putting in great performances everywhere, and I was just kind of watching everything she was in at the time. I think I'd forgotten Tom Ellis was in it. I hadn't seen Lucifer when I saw Crickley Hall, so it didn't really stand out to me. But I don't really remember anything about it other than I'd seen it, or I didn't. You know, I looked up. The two that I hadn't seen at all were The Haunting 1963, which we haven't quite got to yet, and I hadn't finished Haunted Mansion. And then all the rest are things that I had already seen. But I definitely have some homework to do if I want to do this again next year with a part 2. I need to watch the Amityville Horror. Yeah, these are mostly ones that I found memorable. I put them on the list because I found them memorable for one reason or another. In the case of Buffy's Where the Wild Things Are, for the wrong reasons. Yeah, they were mostly fairly memorable. Crickley Hall less so than the others, and Crimson Peak not so much. We have 5 left, but only 2 stories because what we have is 2 that are adapted from or inspired by The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, and 3 that are adapted from or inspired by The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And obviously 2 of these are Mike Flanagan Netflix series. So Mike Flanagan made these series for Netflix that were all horror. They were all, well, 3 out of the 4 were based on literature. And 2 of them are Haunted House, which is these 2. The other 2 were Midnight Mass, which I haven't watched yet, and Fall of the House. Is it called Fall of the House of Usher? The Fall of the Edgar Allan Poe one, which I have watched and was brilliant, but is not a haunted house story. So these 2 both have Haunting of Hill House and Haunting of Bly Manor both share some actors, and they are both based on classic literature. Although in the case of Bly Manor, it draws on other stories. It's kind of Haunting of Hill House is very much inspired by, loosely, a specific story. Fall of the House of Usher, or whatever the series was called, takes a different Edgar Allan Poe story for each episode, more or less. And Haunting of Bly Manor is somewhere between the 2. It's primarily Turn of the Screw, but it does have elements taken from other bits of Henry James, especially a flashback episode, which is a different story. I think it's called The Romance of Old Clothes or something. So 2 stories, 5 adaptations. Turn of the Screw is the classic unreliable narrator story. So the unreliable narrator is a narrative device where you are not quite sure if you can trust what the narrator is telling you. So it could be first person, where somebody's saying, I did this, I saw this, I did this, and you can't quite trust whether they're telling the truth or whether their perception is accurate. Or it can even be third person. Haunting of Hill House is also an unreliable point of view, but it's not an unreliable narrator, it's third person point of view. But they both kind of play with this concept. I think Turn of the Screw more than Haunting of Hill House. I'll get to that. The Turn of the Screw is the most famous unreliable narrator story, apart from the Odyssey. It is the whole point of the story is that you can't quite trust whether the story as it's being presented to you is accurate. And I think so. This adaptation is a British one. Is it BBC? Squinting at that picture, yes, it is. BBC adaptation. BBC literary adaptations tend to be very close to the source. The 1995 Pride and Prejudice is almost word for word Jane Austen's novel, except that they added the scene where Darcy goes swimming in a lake and has a wet shirt, which I think we can all say thank you for. And that was a good addition. Not going to take that out. But the rest of it was an extremely faithful adaptation of the novel. This is how BBC literary adaptations tend to go. They tend to be very, very faithful to their source material as much as they can. And Turn of the Screw is similar. I have to confess, I have read Haunting of Hill House. I have not read Turn of the Screw, but I am aware of the novel and how it develops. And I know that this adaptation is very close to the novel. It's also period piece. It's adapting the novel pretty straightforwardly. Henry James wrote end of the 19th century, and this is a period piece set at that time. It's fun. The lead character is played by Michelle Dockery, who is Lady Mary in Downton Abbey. And bizarrely, one of the other characters, but not her love interest, if I remember right, is played by Dan Stevens, who played Matthew Crawley in Downton Abbey. This they did together before Downton Abbey. So if you're a Downton Abbey fan and you just want to see the 2 of them act together in something very different, then this is a good one to watch. I thought it was a really good adaptation. I think it gets across the unreliable narrator aspect of the novel very well because it has a framing device. And the use of the framing device makes it clear that what you are seeing is Michelle Dockery's story. I can't remember the main character's name now. But it's her character's story. It's what her character says happened. And her character has very good reason. Very, very good reason to not necessarily be telling the truth. She is, well, I mean, pretty sure this is in the opening. She is in prison on a charge of murder. So she's a very good reason for potentially lying. That's part of what makes her so unreliable. And then the whole thing plays out, and you don't know if it's a lie she's telling, if she is psychologically disturbed, if everybody's psychologically disturbed, or if there are really ghosts in the house. And it's very ambiguous. Normally, I'm not super keen on that level of ambiguity. Like I said, I like my ghost stories to have ghosts in them. I want actual ghosts. I actively don't enjoy Scooby-Doo. I get why other people do, but I like ghost stories with ghosts in them. I want to watch ghost stories or read them because I like stories about ghosts. So for the most part, I'm not massively into the whole kind of, oh, is it really ghosts or is it all in their heads thing? But I think Turn of the Screw does it very, very well. Henry James does it very, very well, and this adaptation adapts Henry James very well. So in this case, I actually appreciate the unreliable narrator thing. So I will put it pretty high up. Let's see, where are we putting Turn of the Screw? I do really like it. Let's see. It's either going to be top of Possessed Oda Mae Brown or bottom of Sam Wheat. You maybe put this one top of Possessed Oda Mae Brown, but it was very good. Yeah, just because there are so many that are so good. But it's really good. Definitely well worth checking out. And then the other one inspired by Turn of the Screws is Bly Manor, although that has more adaptation, more kind of other influences in it. I also think, so when Flanagan adapted Haunting of Hill House, which he did first, Flanagan heavily adapted it. That's why I'd say it's almost inspired by Haunting of Hill House, his version. He made huge sweeping changes to the story of The Haunting of Hill House. And in some cases, characters barely have anything in common except their name. And one of the things that he took out of Haunting of Hill House was the sexual tension, which is very much present in the other versions, including the novel. And there's sexual tension between various different characters in the story. But particularly between two of the women. And he didn't take out the LGBTQ plus, it's hard to say, character. He kept the character of Theo openly gay, where she'd had to be much more closeted in the earlier versions because of the time period. So he didn't get rid of the queer representation, but he got rid of the specific tension, romantic sexual tension between characters that was present in Haunting of Hill House. And I think he kind of transferred it to Bly Manor. When he was adapting Turn of the Screw, he's expanded it quite a lot. So it's not made up of as many different stories as his later Fall of the House of Usher would be. But it does have these other elements. It has this Romance of Old Clothes story, and it has it's expanded Turn of the Screw quite a bit. So I think he took the kind of romantic tension that he'd taken out of Hill House, and he kept it between two women and put it in Bly Manor, and then actually expanded on it as well and went further with it than Hill House does. Mick of South Staffs just said in the chat, Turn of the Screw in a subtle, sophisticated way keeps you intrigued and disturbed long after you finished watching it. Yeah, that's true. I'm almost thinking like I should put it higher now. I do. It is the Turn of the Screw. That adaptation is the only time I've really appreciated the whole unreliable narrator thing, I have to confess. Yeah. I think I'm going to put it higher. I'm very easily convinced, aren't I? I'm going to put it even higher. There we go. It was really good. It's ages since I've seen it. I want to watch it again now. Bly Manor plays with that idea. It doesn't have the same level of unreliable narrator as Turn of the Screw does, even though it's based on the same source novel. Bly Manor is much more, I'd say it's unambiguous about its ghosts. Now, for me personally, I like that. If you are a huge fan of the unreliable narrator and the, oh, is it psychological or is it real tension, then that will be a problem for you with Bly Manor. And I wonder if that's why some people didn't respond as enthusiastically to Bly Manor as they did to Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House. Flanagan did Dr. Sleep as well while I'm thinking about it. Anyway, it's not as unambiguous. I think Flanagan's Haunting of Bly Manor is pretty unambiguous that the house is haunted. it would be I'm trying not to spoil it in case anyone hasn't seen it. There's, certain parts in that where if there aren't ghosts, then you're going to struggle to explain some things. He does keep the framing device of a character telling the story many years later. But it's also happier than Turn of the Screw. It doesn't have a happy ending. I think the only ghost stories with happy endings are the comic ones, like The Ghost Goes West. But it has a much happier ending. I really like Bly Manor. Also, the imagery of Bly Manor, I have to say, massively like stuck with me. I was saying earlier, like I get bad dreams if I watch horror and then go straight to bed. And I like could not get the image of the ghost. There's several ghosts, but the woman from the lake in Bly Manor walking across, and like every time I would go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would imagine that she was at the other end of the hall in the bedroom at the end of the hall. I knew it wasn't real, obviously. I'm not completely insane. But like I could not get that image out of my head every time I went to the bathroom. It replaced the old lady in the bathtub from The Shining, who haunted my nighttime trips to the toilet for a while as well, because I was convinced she was hiding behind the shower curtain. Again, not really. But yeah, that really stuck in my mind. So it is going to go just ahead of Turn of the Screw for me. They're both really good. Turn of the Screw is obviously much more faithful to the source novel, but I like my ghosts unambiguous. And I try not to spoil anything, the ending of Haunting of Bly Manor. I just prefer my endings a little bit less depressing. She says the others are still at the top at the moment. Which is pretty grim. It's just really good. Whew, I've been nattering on for ages. I knew this was going to be a longish one, but we have 3 versions of The Haunting of Hill House left. I will do them in chronological order. So the 1963 film I just watched this morning because I know that a lot of people feel like it is the best one. And it's very, very popular film. And I knew I was going to talk about both of the other versions. So it was like, I'm going to watch this so I can talk about it. Enjoyed it very much. Good film. Definitely. I'm not as convinced as many people are that The Haunting of Hill House is ambiguous. So this is something that in the book and in the 1963 version, people are very fond of saying that The Haunting of Hill House is ambiguous and that the haunting might be entirely in the mind of Eleanor or Nell, the POV character. So it's third person narrative. It's not Eleanor describing what's happening, but it's very much in her head from her limited point of view, not anybody else's. And I'm just not convinced that's the case in either one, to be honest. I think both, and the 1963 film is quite a close adaptation of the book. It did make some changes, but it is relatively close as these things go to the book. And there's stuff in it, like one of the characters, Theo, is psychic. Like, it's very difficult to interpret that any other way. You're watching the movie, Theo knows things she couldn't possibly know. Like, she is psychic. And Eleanor is not the only person reacting to the sounds. It's mostly sounds, this particular haunting. There's also a scene where a door like bows in and out. Very well done. And everybody sees that. So I am not convinced that it's meant to be that ambiguous. I have read the book. It was a little while ago. The book, from what I remember, may have been slightly more ambiguous, but again, Theo pretty much seems psychic. And without, I don't want to spoil it, at the end, it seems pretty clear to me from the narration that something paranormal is going on. There we go. I'm going to put it that way. Try not to ruin it in case anyone hasn't seen it. So I don't find this a particularly ambiguous story. What I think the 1963 film does is mostly use sound for the haunting, which is great. It's really clever. It's in black and white, which also obviously adds certain atmosphere to it. And it's clear that Eleanor Ornell is kind of going out of her mind. Basically, the idea is that the house, which has a kind of inherent evil to it, is driving her mad, that the house is latching on to the most vulnerable person in it. And that's kind of the concept behind what the house is doing to Nell in most versions. So I think Nell, she is psychologically unstable. That is why the house latches onto her. So her mental state is important and significant, and she is clearly not in good mental health. But that doesn't mean that the haunting itself is all in her mind, because that just does not make sense with some of the other things that happen, as far as I'm concerned. So, turn of the screw, yes, that is ambiguous. Haunting of Hill House, I really don't think is. But using mostly sound is a very effective way of producing a scary, spooky, haunted house movie. I mean, famously, you hardly ever see the shark in Jaws, and that's because the model shark didn't look very good. So they minimized the usage of it. And that made it so much more scary, because something that you can sense, feel in the case of Jaws uses the soundtrack. And the soundtrack tells you the shark is there. And you can see the effect of the shark. And that's what the 1963 version of The Haunting does. It uses sound, occasional visuals, and then the effect that it has on the characters you're watching to produce the fear and to make it scary. I don't think that's the same as saying the haunting might not be real. I think it's just a more effective way of producing something that is creepy and scary. Like, nobody is watching Jaws and saying the shark isn't real just because you don't see it very much. So there we go. There's my get off my soapbox on the haunting. But yeah, I thought it was a good movie. It is a bit of its time. I know I've got The Ghost Goes West at the top. I don't know if maybe I just prefer 1930s romantic comedies to 1960s horror movies, because as a modern viewer, you know, some of the style of acting is quite stagey and some of the music is quite kind of in your face dramatic. So I did find, whereas I watched The Ghost Goes West and I'm just enjoying a movie that I love, I did find that I felt a bit more it was of its time when I was watching The Haunting, but that doesn't mean it's not good by any means. I am going to put The Haunting, I'm going to commit sacrilege. It's much like the 1989 Woman in Black. I get why people love it. I get why people really enjoy it. It's just it's good. It's good. It's just not that amazing for me. Enjoyed it, glad I saw it, but I've seen better haunted house movies. The next version then was 1999, and this one everybody hates. I like it. I'm not going to put it high, don't worry. I'm not going to commit that much sacrilege. I went to see this in the cinema in 1999 when I was 16. And it was a good, fun day out. We saw it in the middle of the day. At the time, there wasn't a cinema in our town where I grew up, and we had to get the train into Birmingham to go to the cinema. We went with, we're teenagers, right? And we also went to a girls' school. We went with the boys we had recently met at work. And I threw popcorn at my soon-to-be high school boyfriend, who, for reasons I can't remember, was sitting a few rows in front. We had an empty cinema, so we spread ourselves out. So I associate going to see this film with a fun time out as a teenager. Mix just saying in the chat, The Others was a classic English haunting, but super tragic at the end. Yes, I'm almost doubting how high I've put it, because it's just so sad, but it's so well done that I think it has to stay really high. Yeah, but it's so depressing. It's so sad, but it's just so good. Anyway, yeah, it's funny because mostly I prefer, like, all of the rest, like Woman in Black's pretty tragic, The Others is tragic, and then most of what's in the top one, you know, a lot of them are the less tragic ones. But when tragedy's done really well, especially in a ghost story, it works. So, and which actually is an interesting point about the 1999 version of The Haunting, that in every version, a particular character dies. But in the 1999 version, she sacrifices herself for the greater good, and achieves something with her death, which she does not in 63. I've given it away, haven't I? By using the pronouns. I should have used they instead of she. They do not in 1963. or the book. And then the Flanagan one's sort of in between. The 1999 one is in that way happier, but I think this is not a story where that's quite appropriate. Much as I like the ones with slightly warmer endings a lot of the time, sometimes that's not appropriate to the story, and it's not appropriate to the story of Hill House. It's not that kind of story. It's very much, you're not adapting the spirit of the novel by doing that. When you're doing an adaptation, it's always going to be different because books and films are different. They are completely different things. And no film or TV show or TV episode is ever going to be exactly like the book it's adapting. It would not work in that medium. What you do want, if it's an adaptation, is usually something that adapts the spirit of the story. And that's, I think, one of the places the 1999 version of The Haunting falls down, is it completely fails to adapt the spirit of The Haunting of Hill House, which is a very grim horror. Hill House is not sane. Hill House is sinister, and terrifying. The 1999 one does not get that across with its almost more adventure movie-like ending. It also makes a lot of use of CGI. Now, this is something that I don't mind so much in The Haunted Mansion, which is a family story based on a theme park ride, but it does use a bit too much CGI. At the time, I didn't mind it. I quite enjoyed watching all the spooky stuff happen when I saw it at the cinema. But thinking of it as a kind of scary ghost story, in the 1963 film, you see these kind of cherub faces and statues and things, and they don't actually move, but sometimes the way the shadows move on them, they almost seem to move, or their expression seems to change. And then Robert Wise, the director of the 63 one, does very clever things with altering the kind of shading on the pattern of wallpaper to bring out a face. And it doesn't involve things moving all over the place. It's not in your face and elaborate. It's very, very subtle, but it is more effective than these kind of creepy, ghoulish CGI cherub faces that move around in the 1999 version. So this is going to be low down, even though I enjoyed it when I saw it at the cinema. I have to confess that, as a piece of cinema, it's got a great cast. It's got Owen Wilson, Liam Neeson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, but it's not going to be high up. I don't know whether to put it in Willie Lopez or in Carl as just the worst. I was going to put it in Willie Lopez because, I enjoyed my trip to the cinema to see it, but I haven't really felt moved to see it since. And as an adaptation, it is terrible. So let's put it down in Carl level. Just the worst. I feel bad. I enjoyed it. It's not completely irredeemable, but if we're judging it as a haunted house movie and as an adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, then it's not good. And finally, Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House. So this is a great example of something that veers massively from the source material to the point that sometimes they barely seem to connect, but does get the spirit of the source material. It is a slightly less grim, and is it a slightly less grim ending? It is an ending with a tiny bit more warmth to it, sort of, also depending how you read the ending, which is a bit ambiguous. But it is just a masterpiece of filmmaking, and I think the way he's adapted it is quite effective. It's interesting that he chose to get rid of all the romantic and sexual tension that kind of flies between the characters in the other versions, and exactly which characters are attracted to which other characters depends which version you're watching or reading. But what Flanagan did, interestingly, was make them all a family. Father, mother, 5 children. So the main characters are all brothers and sisters. So there is no romantic or sexual tension whatsoever. I think he moved some of it to Bly Manor. It's an interesting choice. I think maybe he did it to just completely focus on the spooky side of it, the kind of twisted family history that he'd created as part of his adaptation. And also, I guess the romantic relationship between the parents is quite important. So that puts the focus on that side of things on the parents, rather than on the other characters. It is, the plot is massively, massively changed, but the central concept of the house driving vulnerable, psychologically vulnerable characters to acts of violence against themselves or others is there. And then it's just got these masterpiece scenes. So one thing is there's hidden ghosts everywhere, and I never see this stuff. I never notice it. The woman in black has to be like halfway down the corridor before I've spotted she's there. I'm not very observant of these things. I blame my dodgy contact lenses. I never see stuff like that. But I do love watching videos on YouTube where people point them out. And also, I think even if you haven't noticed it consciously, the existence of these ghosts tucked away and hidden in the corners everywhere has an impact on your mind, and it makes it spookier and scarier even if you don't consciously spot them. And then for people who are more clear-sighted than me who do spot them, it's brilliant, and you can play this like spot the ghost, and it's a really wonderful creepy moment if you do catch one of them. The other masterpiece is the episode in the middle where so there's the bent neck lady who I should have seen coming that reveal and didn't. Somehow, when I watched this, I was pretty familiar with ghost stories. I've been working on them for years, and I somehow did not see that coming. I should have done. And that happens, and then there's the next episode, and it takes place at a funeral home. And the whole episode, it's like a bottle show in the funeral home, and there's a scene with everybody in it, and they're circling, the camera's circling the coffin, and everybody's there, and then the spirit is there, and then it's not, and then the body moves a tiny bit. I think it is a masterpiece of filmmaking. It's absolutely brilliant. The ending, I think, is grim enough to be faithful to the spirit of the book while being marginally less grim. I mean, honestly, it's not. In some ways, it's grimmer than the book. I don't know. I don't know where I'd put it in the grimness stakes, but I think it works. So, Haunting of Hill House is number one. It is just an absolute masterpiece. If you enjoy ghost stories, horror, haunted house movies and TV shows, if you have any level of enjoyment for any of that, then you've got to watch The Haunting of Hill House. I cannot say enough good things about it. So there's my list. I don't know if anybody wants to pop any disagreements with me in the chat. My coffee is a bit cold by now, but cold coffee is still all right to drink. Did I get any of it completely wrong? And am I too harsh on the 1999 The Haunting? Because, like, I did enjoy it. I'm going to move it up. Not far. No, I'm not. It's not as good as The Haunted Mansion. That's not fair to The Haunted Mansion. I really want to move the 1999 The Haunting up to just reflect the fact that when I saw it at the cinema, I enjoyed it. But I think that's not fair to The Haunted Mansion, which, while it's not brilliant, is better. Deek says cold coffee is what I disagree with. I don't mind cold coffee. I mean, it's better hot, but I don't mind it cold. I mean, it's basically a frappuccino at this point in a pumpkin spice mug. Was there anything I got horribly wrong? If I do this again next year, it will be a lot more evenly spread, I think. I reckon, if I start like catching up on all the ones I haven't seen rather than like listing my favorites, then I think it's going to come out a lot more even. So, yeah. And I think I probably will end up doing that. Like, I was going to do something else for next year's Halloween tier ranking. But there's so many haunted house movies, and especially like I've got a haunted castle in there as well as a haunted hotel. Deek says, I have fond memories of Caspar, but that may be rose-tinted glasses. I may have been a bit overly harsh on Caspar. I think because I only watched it, last year or something at the age of 40, I really struggled with the fact that Caspar seemed like such a young boy, and then suddenly he's a teenager who is clearly romantically and sexually attracted to Christina Ricci, for which I do not blame him. He is an appropriate age for Christina Ricci at that age. That's fine, but it doesn't match the Ghost we've been watching. But I may just be excessively bothered by that because I watched it as a 40-year-old mother and not a child. Mick from South South says, I think the complexity of any of the books' film adaptation, when it's done right and the filmmaker manages to capture this, that's what makes it so special and stays with you years after watching. Yeah, that's true. A lot of them are adaptations of books, aren't they? I mean, obviously I've got multiple adaptations of the same book because I've got 2 Woman in Blacks, 2 Turns of the Screw, and 3 Hauntings of Hill House. Yeah, I definitely think one of the things that moved things up was If They Stayed With Me. Oh, Mick says agree with you on Haunting of Hill House. It's just a masterpiece, isn't it? It's so good. And yeah, the others as well. Like, I'm almost surprised how high I put the others because, as you can see, like the next one is The Ghost Goes West, which is just lovely and happy. And Ghosts is up on the top as well. And I'm surprised how high I put the others and Haunting of Hill House. Well, no, I'm not surprised how I put Haunting of Hill House. I'm surprised how high I put the others. But it stays with you as well, doesn't it? When you've got an ending that works, and it doesn't have to be massively original. Although I never see things coming. Infamously, I never see things coming. I mean, I felt so bad. I review Rings of Power for Den of Geek, and I'm so bad at working things out sometimes. And I got who Hellbrand is wrong for like the whole of season 1. I was really loudly wrong about it. And Den of Geek hire me because I'm a Tolkien expert. And I like totally called that one wrong. So it's partly me, I guess. I somehow managed to be surprised by quite obvious ghost stories quite often. But the others, yeah, the imagery of the others, I think, is what stayed with me. There. And the others, I think, isn't a book to film, actually, come to think of it. We were talking about book to film, and I got distracted talking about the others, which I think is a film original, although I would say very much influenced by Turn of the Screw. It's not an adaptation of Turn of the Screw at all, but I would say it's definitely got Turn of the Screw in its DNA. But the imagery in the others is just so good. And then you rewatch it and it comes the whole film. It's one of those films that once you know the reveal, you rewatch it and the entire film looks different. Mick says it's the vulnerability of the mother and her children. Yeah, that's true. Nicole Kidman managed. I'm just ruining the others for anyone who hasn't seen it. I'm so sorry. Nicole Kidman manages to be just as sympathetic the second time you watch it, which is quite an achievement. Like, she shouldn't be, you know? When you watch it the second time, when you know, you shouldn't empathize with her, but you still do. Like, she is so vulnerable. And she's a great actress. It's a great performance. It's so beautifully filmed. And then obviously it also introduced me to the concept of corpse photography, which was exciting to learn about and fall down an absolute rabbit hole. And Mick says, need to watch it again. Took me years to get over it. Yeah. I know. I haven't watched it all that many times. And that's why it's so high as well, because from not watching it very many times, I must have watched it, I don't know, 3 or 4 times over 20 years, more than 20 years. But I can picture it so clearly in my head. And I think that's partly why it's so high. And then, like, The Ghost Goes West is almost the opposite. I watched The Ghost Goes West on a loop. We had it on a VHS we recorded off BBC 2 in the 90s, early 90s. And I watched The Ghost Goes West over and over and over and over again because it's nice and happy. And then I watched The Woman in Black because I'm a weirdo over and over and over and over again. So those two are so high because of the rewatchability of just wanting to watch them over and over again. Whereas the others, and to a lesser extent Haunting of Hill House, where it's more just time to rewatch an entire series, but they are so high because the images are just indelible in your mind, even if you haven't seen them in forever. And I think one of the reasons for putting some of the lower ones lower is like Doctor Sleep, I saw much more recently and I'm struggling to remember it. I remember liking Ewan McGregor in it. I remember thinking it was decent. Oh, Mick says, what English haunting books do you recommend? Oh, good question. Coffee, while I think. So obviously, Turn of the Screw, which I haven't even read. Woman in Black, obviously Woman in Black. Read the book, love it. There is also, let me grab the book real quick. Yeah, my collection of English haunted house stories. Let's see. Her Fearful Symmetry was quite fun. It's by the author of The Time Traveler's Wife. I don't know if I even prefer it to The Time Traveler's Wife. I'm not sure. That one is a haunted apartment, if I remember right. Oh, getting the cameras reversed. It's a haunted apartment and it's set in London near to Highgate Cemetery in London, very famous cemetery in London. And that Highgate plays quite a major, it's quite, maybe not so much to say it's a character, but Highgate is very prominent in the book. Makes the London setting quite prominent. Not one I want to reread again, a tiny bit too not grim in the sense of gory. There's an unpleasantness to it in places that isn't entirely for me, but I read the whole thing and enjoyed it, so I definitely recommend it as a one to read. I also enjoyed The Silent Companions. This is Laura Purcell. This one, I want to say, is it set in Yorkshire? The dedication is for Juliet, not me, not my spelling anyway. I just hadn't noticed that before. I feel like this is set up north somewhere. There's a lot of English ghost stories set up north. I think Crimson Peak is as well, now I come to think of it. It's a very classic, it's a period piece, if I remember it, because The Woman in Black is set in early 20th century. 1865. Yeah, there's parallel stories here. There's one in the 1860s and one in the 1630s. So it's a period story. That was good. Yeah, it was nice, creepy, atmospheric setting. And then, so this one is set in the Himalayas. I can't remember if the author is English. I think the characters are. Can't remember where Michelle Parver is from. So she has two ghost stories. One is set in Antarctica. No, the Arctic, one or the other. And the other one is set in the Himalayas, but it's English characters. It's set in the 1930s, this one, Thin Air. So the characters are English, although they are in the Himalayas or Himalayas. I'm not sure which is the correct pronunciation. Oh, Michelle Parver is British. Moved to the UK when she was 3, after being born in Malawi. So yes, that I'd say that counts as English, even if the setting is the Himalayas, because it's very English characters. It doesn't have the creepy English haunted house vibe, obviously. If that's what you're after, then you definitely want. If you want like a classic English haunted house, then that would be The Silent Companions. If you want something a bit more modern, but definitely English haunting in London, you want Her Fearful Symmetry. And if you want something with English characters and English attitudes and an English sensibility, but in the Himalayas, Thin Air. This is one of my favorite ghost stories I've read. Dark Matter was good too, but Thin Air, again, the reveal. Oh God, the reveal in this. Whew. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but the reveal in Thin Air that will stay with you. It's very, very good. I also like stories about mountaineering in the Himalayas. Inherited that from my mum, but anyway. But yeah, that was very, very good. Yeah, it's funny. I kind of hadn't really thought about how many of these are book adaptations. Not all of them, though. Some of them are original movies. So Crimson Peak, I think, is original. Oh, you're welcome. He said thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Crimson Peak's an original movie. Haunted Mansion's based on a theme park ride. The TV episodes are original. American Horror Story, I'm pretty sure, is original to the TV. and Beetlejuice. So it's probably about a 50-50 split, maybe. Maybe even slightly leaning more toward original to TV and film, considering I've got both versions of Ghosts on there. Yeah, but anyway, I can't see anybody like horrendously disagreeing with me in the chat. So presumably I didn't say anything awful. Oh, Mick says, have you seen The Conjuring? I have not. That is on my list of movies I need to watch. Yeah. It's funny because I thought, like, you know, I work on ghost stories, I write ghost stories, I research ghost stories, I love ghost story movies. And I thought I'd seen a decent proportion of them. And when I started looking up, you know, haunted house movies and stuff, just to kind of make sure I was catching everything, there's so many I've never seen. And I was like, how are there this many I haven't seen when this is literally what I do for a living? But there we go. So no, The Conjuring is on my list of things I need to see. And I need to see Amityville Horror. I've read the entire book. I need to watch the movie. I think the problem was I read the book and then didn't feel the need to watch the movie because the Amityville Horror is just... it's just not that massively interesting to me. I did cover it in my video on haunted houses, which I put out in the summer. And I did cover the Amityville Horror. Yeah, it's interesting, but I just didn't find it that desperately fascinating that I wanted to go watch a movie about it, but I will. For the sake of, you know, science, I will watch the Amityville Horror at some point in the next year. Oh dear. Well, I can see numbers dropping. I've been chatting for an hour and 40 minutes. And I'm assuming that nobody has any desperate objections to any of my placements because nobody's said so. So I will take a couple of minutes. You could let you all say goodbye to the dog. I'm going to plug my book because I have to plug my book. I'm sorry. I know it's probably getting really boring because I know everybody who's watching this right now probably has watched videos on my channel before and is sick of me plugging my book. But has to be done. So Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome, retells 13 ghost stories from ancient Roman texts. Some are from histories, some are from poetry, but they are all from Roman texts. It also, talking about haunted houses, includes what is probably the oldest haunted house story in Western literature. Certainly one of the oldest. I think maybe the oldest. Oldest version we have of it. Oh, Deeks says plug away. Thanks, Deeks. The oldest version we have of it is written by Pliny the Younger in 1st century CE or AD. The story itself is almost certainly older than that because Pliny's telling it as quite a well-known folk tale. So pretty much the oldest haunted house story from the Western world I have retold in a modern way in this book, along with 12 others. 2 of them by Pliny. The 12 of them originally featured on my podcast, Creepy Classics. So if you would like to try it out for free, then you can listen to the podcast, or if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free, or you can read the sample. Yeah, anyway, do pick that up if you fancy some historical ghost stories for Halloween. And I will let the dog say goodbye. Come on, Freya. Come on, we got to have a Freya pup moment. High five. Good girl. High five. Good girl. There we go. Say bye-bye to the people. Okay. I think I've probably nattered for long enough. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for anybody who's watched this later. Hopefully I'll work out the microphone next time. And one of these days I'll get the chat coming up. But as you can see, technology is something it takes me a while to get to grips with. But thank you so much for watching and happy Halloween. Bye.